Adolf Hitler was born on the 20th of April, 1889 in the quiet border town of Braunau am Inn, located in Austria-Hungary, now present-day Austria. He was the fourth of 6 children born to Alois Hitler, a mid-level customs official, and his third wife, Clara Pölzel. Of the 6 children, only Adolf and his younger sister Paula survived into adulthood. 3 of his siblings, Gustav, Ida, and Otto, died in infancy, which was unfortunately not uncommon for the time. The household also included Alois's 2 children from his previous marriage, Alois Jr. and Angela, creating a blended family environment. In 1892, following Alois's promotion within the customs administration, the family moved from Austria to Passau, Germany. Adolf was 3 years old. While the family later returned to Austria, the time in Passau left a lasting imprint on him. He adopted a lower Bavarian dialect instead of an Austrian accent, which he would retain for the rest of his life. In 1894, the family moved back to Austria, settling in Leonding. The following year, Alois retired and moved the family to a small farm in Hafeld, near Lambach, where he pursued beekeeping and small-scale farming. Adolf attended the local state-funded primary school, or Volksschule, in Fischelham. This period marked the beginning of tension between Adolf and his father. Alois expected discipline and obedience, while Adolf resisted and deliberately defied his father's expectations. Accounts suggest that Alois was strict and occasionally resorted to beating his son, while his mother often tried to shield him. Farming proved unsuccessful, and in 1897, the family moved again, this time to Lambach. At 8 years old, Adolf took singing lessons, sang in the church choir, and briefly considered becoming a priest. However, in 1898, the family returned permanently to Leonding. In 1900, Adolf's younger brother Edmund died of measles at the age of 6. This event deeply affected him. Once a relatively cheerful and diligent student, Adolf became quiet, withdrawn, and frequently in conflict with teachers and his father. His sister Paula would later recall that Adolf, as a teenager, was often harsh and occasionally violent toward her. Alois Hitler, who had built a stable career in the customs service, expected his son to do the same. Adolf, however, wished to attend classical high school and eventually pursue art. Alois ignored this and instead enrolled him at the Realschule in Linz in September 1900, a school focused on science and technical subjects rather than the arts. Adolf disliked the environment and later wrote in Mein Kampf that he intentionally performed poorly in the hopes his father would allow him to pursue his own interests. On the 3rd of January, 1903, Alois Hitler died suddenly. Following his death, Adolf's academic performance continued to decline. His mother, Clara, allowed him to leave the school in Linz. In 1904, he enrolled at the Realschule in Steyr, where his behavior and grades showed temporary improvement. In 1905, he completed his final exams on a second attempt. With no plans for further education or a specific career, he left school altogether. In 1907, at the age of 18, Adolf Hitler left Linz and moved to Vienna with the intention of studying fine art. He supported himself using orphans' benefits and financial help from his mother. That same year, he applied for admission to the Academy of Fine Arts, Vienna. His application was rejected. He tried again the following year and was rejected a second time. The Academy's director suggested that Hitler consider the School of Architecture. However, he did not have the required secondary education to enroll. On 21st December 1907, Hitler's mother, Clara, died of breast cancer at the age of 47. After her death, he continued living in Vienna. By 1909, his funds had run out. He lived in homeless shelters and later at the Meldemannstrasse men's dormitory. He earned money by working as a casual laborer and by painting and selling small watercolors depicting Vienna's buildings and streets. While in Vienna, Hitler developed interests in architecture and music. He frequently attended performances at the opera, especially Richard Wagner's works, and watched Wagner's Lohengrin 10 times. Vienna also exposed him to widespread political and racial ideologies of the time. The city's mayor, Karl Lueger, used anti-Semitic and German nationalist ideas for political purposes. Similar sentiments were common in the Mariahilf district, where Hitler lived. He was also influenced by nationalist politician Georg Ritter von Schonerer and expressed admiration for the writings of Martin Luther. Hitler read newspapers and pamphlets that promoted anti-Semitic and nationalist views, as well as works by philosophers and thinkers such as Houston Stewart Chamberlain, Charles Darwin, Friedrich Nietzsche, Gustave Le Bon, and Arthur Schopenhauer. During his time in Vienna, he also developed strong anti-Slavic opinions. The exact origins of Hitler's anti-Semitism remain debated. His friend August Kubizek claimed Hitler already held anti-Semitic views while in Linz, though historians like Brigitte Hamann question this. In Mein Kampf, Hitler wrote that he became an anti-Semite in Vienna. Others, such as Reinhold Hanisch, who helped sell his artwork, disagreed. Historian Richard J. Evans notes that most historians believe Hitler's extreme and violent anti-Semitism developed only after Germany's defeat in World War I. In May 1913, Hitler received his final inheritance from his father's estate. He used this money to move to Munich in Germany. In early 1914, he was summoned for military service in the Austro-Hungarian army. He traveled to Salzburg for a medical examination on the 5th of February 1914 and was declared unfit for service. He returned to Munich afterward. Hitler later claimed he did not want to serve in the Habsburg forces because of the ethnic diversity of the empire's army and his belief that Austria-Hungary would soon collapse. In August 1914, when World War I began, Adolf Hitler was living in Munich. Although he was an Austrian citizen, he volunteered to serve in the Bavarian army. According to a 1924 Bavarian government report, his enlistment was likely an administrative mistake, as he should have been sent back to Austria. Hitler was assigned to the Bavarian Reserve Infantry Regiment 16, also known as the List Regiment. He served as a dispatch runner on the Western Front in France and Belgium. Despite the dangerous role, he spent almost half of his service at the regimental headquarters in Fournes-en-Vep, which was positioned behind the front lines. He took part in the First Battle of Ypres in 1914 and received the Iron Cross, second class, for bravery. During the war, his commanding officer, Fritz Wiedemann, reportedly saved his life by pulling him from the rubble of a collapsed building under fire. When not on duty, Hitler drew cartoons and contributed to an army newspaper. In October 1916, during the Battle of the Somme, Hitler was injured in the left thigh by shell fragments when a dugout was hit. He was treated at a hospital in Belitz and rejoined his unit in March 1917. He later took part in battles such as Arras, 1917, and Passchendaele. On the 18th of May, 1918, he received the Black Wound Badge. In August 1918, on the recommendation of Lieutenant Hugo Gutmann, a Jewish officer, he was awarded the Iron Cross First Class, an uncommon honor for someone of his rank, Gefreiter. On the 15th of October 1918, Hitler was temporarily blinded by a mustard gas attack and sent to a hospital in Pasewalk. While recovering, he learned of Germany's defeat. He later claimed that the news caused him to suffer a second, temporary blindness. Hitler described his service in the war as the greatest of all experiences. He was seen as loyal and brave by his superiors. The war strengthened his German nationalism, and he was deeply affected by Germany's surrender in November 1918. Like many nationalists at the time, he believed in the Dolchstoßlegende, or stab-in-the-back myth, which suggested that the German army had not been defeated in battle, but had been betrayed by civilians, Jews, Marxists, and the politicians who signed the armistice, whom he referred to as the November criminals. After the war, the Treaty of Versailles required Germany to give up territory, demilitarize the Rhineland, and pay large reparations. The treaty also included Article 231, which many Germans interpreted as placing full blame for the war on Germany. The economic, social, and political consequences of the treaty caused widespread resentment in the country. Adolf Hitler later used this resentment and sense of national humiliation to support his political ambitions. After World War I ended, Adolf Hitler returned to Munich. With no formal education and no clear career prospects, he remained in the German army. In July 1919, he was assigned to an intelligence unit of the Reichswehr. His responsibilities included attending political meetings, observing various groups, and attempting to influence or report on other soldiers. On the 12th of September 1919, while attending a meeting of the German Workers' Party, DAP, Hitler spoke during a discussion. Party chairman Anton Drexler was impressed by his speaking skills and gave him a copy of his political pamphlet, My Political Awakening. This pamphlet promoted anti-Semitic, nationalist, anti-capitalist, and anti-Marxist ideas. Following instructions from his army superiors, Hitler applied to join the DAP. He became a member within a week and was officially registered as party member number 555. In reality, he was the 55th member. The party had begun its numbering at 500 to appear larger and more established. Hitler's earliest known written statement about Jews was made in a letter dated 16th September 1919, addressed to Adolf Gehmlich. In the letter, now known as the Gehmlich Letter, Hitler wrote that the goal of the government must unshakably be the removal of the Jews altogether. During his involvement in the DAP, Hitler met Dietrich Eckart, one of the party's founders and a member of the Thule Society, an occult nationalist group. Eckart became a mentor to Hitler and introduced him to influential figures in Munich society. To widen its appeal, the German Workers' Party changed its name to the National Sozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, National Socialist German Workers' Party, abbreviated NSDAP, and later commonly called the Nazi Party. Hitler designed the party's new symbol, a black swastika inside a white circle on a red background. Hitler left the army on 31st March 1920. After that, he began working full-time for the Nazi Party. The party remained based in Munich, which at the time was a center for anti-government nationalist activity aimed at opposing Marxism and undermining the Weimar Republic. In his 1947 book, Diary of a Man in Despair, the writer Friedrich Reck Malek-Seven described an early encounter with Adolf Hitler. Reck wrote that Hitler arrived uninvited at a house, wearing gaiters, a floppy hat, and carrying a riding whip. According to the account, Hitler spoke at length, becoming increasingly loud even though no one interrupted or disagreed with him. The servants, thinking an attack was taking place, entered the room. After Hitler left, the guests remained silent and uneasy, Reck compared the feeling to unexpectedly sharing a train compartment with someone mentally unstable. By February 1921, Hitler had become an effective public speaker. He addressed a crowd of more than 6,000 people. To promote the event, members of the Nazi Party drove trucks through Munich, displaying swastika flags and handing out leaflets. Hitler gained attention for his aggressive speeches against the Treaty of Versailles, political opponents, Marxists, and Jews. In June 1921, while Hitler and Dietrich Eckart were in Berlin raising funds for the party, internal disagreements arose within the Nazi Party leadership in Munich. Some members of the executive committee wanted to merge with the German Socialist Party, DSP, in Nuremberg. Hitler returned to Munich on the 11th of July 1921 and submitted his resignation from the party in protest. The party leadership realized his resignation would significantly weaken the organization. Hitler agreed to return on the condition that he become party chairman, replacing Anton Drexler, and that the party headquarters remain in Munich. These terms were accepted, and he rejoined the party on 26 July 1921, now listed as member number 3680. Opposition to Hitler still existed within the party. Some members had expelled Hermann Esser, a close associate of Hitler. They also distributed 3,000 pamphlets accusing Hitler of betraying the party. Hitler responded by speaking at several public gatherings, defending himself and Esser. His speeches were met with strong approval from audiences. On 29 July 1921, at a special party congress, he was elected party chairman with 533 votes in favor and 1 against. Hitler's speeches in Munich beer halls became increasingly popular. As a demagogue, he made frequent use of populist themes. His speeches blamed various groups, including Jews and Marxists, for Germany's economic and political problems. He applied his understanding of mass psychology and personal presence to influence audiences. Observers noted the strong emotional impact of his speeches on large crowds, as well as his intense gaze in smaller settings. Alphonse Heck, who later became a member of the Hitler Youth, described the reaction of crowds during Hitler's speeches. According to Heck, people would shout, "Sieg Heil," repeatedly, often with great emotion, and he recalled feeling completely devoted to Hitler after such an experience. In the early years of the Nazi Party, Adolf Hitler began to attract a number of loyal followers. Among them were Rudolf Hess, the former World War I fighter pilot Hermann Göring, and Army officer Ernst Röhm. Röhm became the leader of the party's paramilitary wing, the Sturmabteilung, SA, also known as the Stormtroopers. The SA was responsible for protecting Nazi meetings and physically confronting political opponents. Another influence during this time was the Aufbauvereinigung, a secretive association of white Russian émigrés and early Nazi supporters. The organization received financial backing from wealthy industrialists. Members of this group promoted the idea of a global Jewish conspiracy and connected international finance with Bolshevism. These ideas contributed to the development of Hitler's worldview. On 24 February 1920, the Nazi Party publicly announced its 25-point program. The program was not a unified political ideology, but rather a collection of ideas common in the Völkisch, ethno-nationalist, and pan-German movement. It included ultranationalism, rejection of the Treaty of Versailles, distrust of capitalism, and elements that appeared socialist. To Hitler, the most important part of the program was its anti-Semitic position. He viewed the document mainly as a tool for propaganda and recruitment, rather than a detailed plan for governance. In 1923, Adolf Hitler attempted to overthrow the government of Bavaria in an event later known as the Beer Hall Putsch. He sought assistance from former World War I General Erich Ludendorff. The Nazi Party looked to Italian fascism for inspiration, particularly Benito Mussolini's March on Rome in 1922. Hitler intended to carry out a similar march, beginning in Bavaria and then expanding the movement toward Berlin. To increase the chances of success, Hitler and Ludendorff approached Gustav Ritter von Kahr, the state commissioner of Bavaria, who held significant political power in the region. They also interacted with Hans Ritter von Seisser, the head of the Bavarian police, and Otto von Lossow, a Reichswehr military commander. However, these Bavarian leaders preferred to establish a nationalist dictatorship without Hitler's involvement. On the 8th of November 1923, Gustav von Kahr was speaking to a crowd of about 3,000 people at the Burgerbräukeler Beer Hall in Munich. During the event, Hitler and members of the Sturmabteilung SA entered the hall and interrupted the speech. Hitler declared that a national revolution had begun and announced the formation of a new government with Ludendorff. He then moved Kahr, Seisser, and Lossow into a side room, and while holding a pistol, demanded their cooperation. They appeared to agree. Hitler's followers managed to occupy several key locations, including the local military and police headquarters. However, Kahr and the other Bavarian leaders quickly withdrew their support once they were released. The German army and state police did not join Hitler's side. The following morning, 9 November 1923, Hitler and his followers marched from the beer hall toward the Bavarian War Ministry in an attempt to seize control. Police confronted the group and opened fire, dispersing the demonstrators. The coup failed. In total, 16 Nazi Party members and 4 police officers were killed. After the failure of the Beer Hall Putsch in November 1923, Adolf Hitler fled to the home of his associate Ernst Hanfstaengl. Some accounts suggest he considered suicide during this time. He was arrested on the 11th of November 1923 and charged with high treason. Reports describe him as depressed but composed at the time of his arrest. Hitler's trial before the Special People's Court in Munich began in February 1924. While he awaited trial, Alfred Rosenberg temporarily took over leadership of the Nazi Party. On April 1, 1924, the court sentenced Hitler to 5 years of Festungshaft, or fortress confinement, at Landsberg prison. This form of imprisonment was relatively lenient and intended for political offenders rather than common criminals. At Landsberg, Hitler received favorable treatment. He was permitted to receive visitors, correspond by mail, and meet with members of the Nazi Party. On the 20th of December 1924, he was released from prison after serving just over 1 year, including time spent in pre-trial detention. His early release was granted by the Bavarian Supreme Court, despite objections from the state prosecutor. During his time in prison, Hitler dictated much of the first volume of his book, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. He initially dictated to his chauffeur, Emil Maurice, and later to his deputy, Rudolf Hess. The book was dedicated to Dietrich Eckart, a member of the Thule Society, and one of Hitler's early mentors. Mein Kampf combined autobiographical elements with an explanation of Hitler's ideology. It discussed his plans for territorial expansion and the establishment of a dictatorship based on racial principles. Throughout the book, Jews were described in dehumanizing terms and portrayed as harmful to society. Although Hitler did not specify the method of their removal, historian Ian Kershaw notes that the book contains an undeniable genocidal intent. Mein Kampf was published in 2 volumes, the first in 1925 and the second in 1926. Between 1925 and 1932, approximately 228,000 copies were sold. In 1933, Hitler's first year as Chancellor of Germany, sales rose to 1 million copies. Shortly before he became eligible for parole, Bavarian authorities attempted to deport Hitler to Austria. However, the Austrian federal government declined the request, stating that his service in the German army during World War I had nullified his Austrian citizenship. In response, Hitler formally renounced his Austrian citizenship on the 7th of April 1925. When Adolf Hitler was released from Landsberg prison in December 1924, the political atmosphere in Germany was relatively stable. The economy had improved compared to the immediate post-war years, and political violence had decreased. These conditions reduced the public appetite for radical movements, limiting Hitler's immediate political opportunities. Because of the Beer Hall Putsch in 1923, the Nazi Party and its associated organizations were banned in Bavaria. On the 4th of January 1925, Hitler met with Heinrich Held, the Prime Minister of Bavaria. During this meeting, Hitler promised to respect the authority of the state and to seek political power only through legal and democratic means. Following this agreement, the Bavarian government lifted the ban on the Nazi Party on the 16th of February 1925. Despite this progress, Hitler faced new restrictions. After delivering an inflammatory speech on the 27th of February 1925, he was prohibited from public speaking by the Bavarian authorities. This ban remained in effect until 1927. To continue expanding the party's influence during his speaking ban, Hitler delegated organizational efforts to several key members: Gregor Strasser, Otto Strasser, and Joseph Goebbels. They focused primarily on growing the Nazi Party's presence in northern Germany. Gregor Strasser, in particular, emphasized socialist aspects of the party's program, which sometimes differed from Hitler's priorities. On the 24th of October 1929, the United States stock market collapsed, beginning the Great Depression. The economic crisis severely affected Germany. Millions of people lost their jobs, and several major banks failed. Economic hardship created social and political instability. Hitler and the Nazi Party saw this as an opportunity to increase public support. They campaigned on promises to reject the Treaty of Versailles, improve the economy, and restore employment. The onset of the Great Depression in 1929 created new political opportunities for Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Many Germans had already become dissatisfied with the parliamentary republic, which was perceived as weak and ineffective. Moderate political parties struggled to respond to economic hardship and increasing political extremism from both the left and the right. In this climate, the Nazi Party gained more visibility, especially after the 1929 referendum, which helped promote its ideas. In the September 1930 Reichstag elections, political instability increased. The existing Grand Coalition government collapsed and was replaced by a minority cabinet led by Chancellor Heinrich Brüning of the Center Party. Brüning relied on emergency decrees issued by President Paul von Hindenburg. This method of ruling by decree became common, contributing to a decline in parliamentary democracy and paving the way for authoritarian governance. In these elections, the Nazi Party rose from relative obscurity, securing 18.3% of the vote and 107 seats in the Reichstag. This result made it the second largest political party in parliament. In late 1930, Hitler appeared publicly at the trial of two Reichswehr officers, Richard Scheringer and Hans Luden, who were charged with being members of the Nazi Party, which was prohibited for military personnel. During the trial, defense lawyer Hans Frank asked Hitler to testify. On the 25th of September, 1930, Hitler stated that the Nazi Party would seek political power only through democratic elections. This testimony appealed to many military officers and helped increase his reputation. Chancellor Brüning's economic policies, which focused on austerity, were unpopular and brought little improvement. Hitler used this to his advantage. His speeches and propaganda targeted groups particularly affected by economic hardship, including farmers, war veterans, and the middle class. Despite renouncing his Austrian citizenship in 1925, Hitler remained stateless for nearly 7 years. This meant he could not run for public office and could potentially be deported. On 25th February 1932, Dietrich Klages, the Nazi interior minister of the German state of Brunswick, appointed Hitler as a government official in Brunswick's delegation to the Reichsrat in Berlin. This position granted Hitler citizenship in Brunswick, and therefore German citizenship. In 1932, Hitler ran against President Paul von Hindenburg in the German presidential election. On the 27th of January, 1932, he delivered a speech to the Industry Club in Düsseldorf, gaining support from several leading industrialists. Hindenburg's support came from nationalist, monarchist, Catholic, Republican, and some social democratic groups. Hitler's campaign used the slogan "Hitler über Deutschland," Hitler over Germany, emphasizing his ambition and his use of aircraft to travel and speak across the country. He was one of the first politicians to use air travel extensively for campaigning. Hitler finished second in both rounds of the election, receiving more than 35% of the vote in the final round. Although he lost to Hindenburg, the election established him as a major political figure in Germany. As Germany continued to face political instability and economic difficulties, the inability to form a stable government became increasingly problematic. Two influential conservative politicians, Franz von Papen and Alfred Hugenberg, along with several industrialists and businessmen, wrote a letter to President Paul von Hindenburg. In this letter, they urged Hindenburg to appoint Adolf Hitler as the leader of a government that would be independent from parliamentary parties and capable of inspiring mass public support. Hindenburg was initially reluctant to appoint Hitler as chancellor. However, two additional parliamentary elections, held in July and November 1932, failed to produce a majority government. As a result, political pressure increased, and Hindenburg eventually agreed. On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. He led a coalition government consisting of the Nazi Party, which held the most seats in the Reichstag, and the German National People's Party, DNVP, led by Hugenberg. The swearing-in ceremony took place in President Hindenburg's office and was brief and formal. The Nazi Party was given 3 positions in the new cabinet. Hitler became Chancellor. Wilhelm Frick was appointed Minister of the Interior, and Hermann Göring was made Minister of the Interior for Prussia. These positions were particularly important to Hitler because they provided control over police forces in many parts of Germany. By late 1932, Germany was still struggling with political instability and economic hardship. Successive governments were unable to secure a majority in parliament, which made effective governance difficult. In response to the ongoing crisis, 2 influential conservative politicians, Franz von Papen and Alfred Hugenberg, along with several industrial and business leaders, sent a letter to President Paul von Hindenburg. In it, they recommended appointing Adolf Hitler as the head of a government independent from parliamentary parties, suggesting that he could inspire widespread public support. Hindenburg was hesitant at first and did not trust Hitler. However, two further Reichstag elections, held in July and November 1932, also failed to establish a stable majority government. With no practical alternatives left, and under increasing political pressure, Hindenburg eventually agreed. On the 30th of January 1933, Adolf Hitler was appointed Chancellor of Germany. He led a coalition government made up of the Nazi Party, now the largest party in the Reichstag, and the German National People's Party, DNVP, led by Alfred Hugenberg. The swearing-in ceremony took place in President Hindenburg's office and was brief. The Nazi Party received only 3 cabinet positions. Adolf Hitler became Chancellor. Wilhelm Frick was appointed Minister of the Interior, and Hermann Göring became Minister of the Interior for Prussia. These roles were significant because they gave the Nazis control over much of the German police force, strengthening their ability to enforce political authority. As Chancellor, Adolf Hitler faced opposition from parties that attempted to form a majority government without Nazi involvement. Because the Reichstag remained politically divided, Hitler asked President Paul von Hindenburg to dissolve Parliament once again. New elections were scheduled for early March 1933. On the 27th of February 1933, the Reichstag building in Berlin was set on fire. Marinus van der Lubbe, a Dutch communist, was found at the scene and arrested. Hermann Göring and other Nazi leaders claimed that the fire was part of a communist uprising. Some early historians, such as William L. Shirer and Alan Bullock, suggested that the Nazis themselves had started the fire. However, most modern historians believe that van der Lubbe acted alone. Following the fire, Hitler persuaded Hindenburg to sign the Reichstag fire decree on the 28th of February 1933. The decree, which was drafted by the Nazis, suspended many civil liberties, including freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to assemble. It also allowed authorities to detain people without trial. This was legally justified under Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution, which allowed emergency measures to protect public safety and order. Using the decree, the government suppressed the German Communist Party, KPD. Approximately 4,000 communist members and officials were arrested. In the days leading up to the election, the Nazi Party carried out political campaigning accompanied by paramilitary violence and anti-communist propaganda. The election was held on the 5th of March, 1933. The Nazi Party received 44% of the vote, making it the largest party in the Reichstag. However, it still did not have an absolute majority. To govern, Hitler continued a coalition with the German National People's Party, DNVP. On 21st March 1933, the newly elected Reichstag opened with a formal ceremony at the Garrison Church in Potsdam. This event, later called the Day of Potsdam, was organized to symbolically associate the Nazi movement with traditional Prussian military and aristocratic values. Adolf Hitler appeared in a formal morning coat and bowed respectfully to President Paul von Hindenburg, who wore his military uniform. The ceremony was intended to present an image of unity between the old establishment and the new government. Although the Nazi Party did not hold an absolute majority in parliament, Hitler sought full legislative authority. To achieve this, his government introduced the Ermächtigungsgesetz, or Enabling Act, officially titled the Law to Remedy the Distress of People and Reich. This law would allow the cabinet to pass legislation without the consent of the Reichstag or the president for a period of 4 years. These laws could also deviate from the Weimar Constitution, except in specific cases. Because the Enabling Act amended the Constitution, it required a 2/3 majority to pass. To ensure this majority, the Nazi government used powers from the Reichstag fire decree to arrest all 81 Communist Party (KPD) deputies. Despite their strong campaign against communism, the Nazis had still permitted the KPD to participate in the election. Additionally, some members of the Social Democratic Party (SPD) were prevented from attending the vote. On 23 March 1933, the Reichstag met in the Kroll Opera House in Berlin under tense conditions. Uniformed members of the Sturmabteilung (SA) were stationed inside the building, while crowds outside shouted slogans. During the session, Hitler promised Center Party leader Ludwig Kaas that President Hindenburg would retain his constitutional power of veto. With this assurance, the Center Party agreed to support the legislation. The vote resulted in 444 in favor and 94 against, with only the Social Democratic Party opposing it. The passage of the Enabling Act, combined with the earlier Reichstag fire decree, gave Hitler's government the legal authority to enact laws without parliamentary approval, effectively establishing a dictatorship. Adolf Hitler declared in 1934 that the National Socialist movement would last for 1,000 years, reminding critics that people had also laughed when he first claimed he would one day govern Germany. Once he had gained control of the executive and legislative branches, Hitler and the Nazi leadership moved to eliminate remaining political opposition. The Social Democratic Party, SPD, was banned and its assets were confiscated. On the 2nd of May, 1933, while trade union representatives were in Berlin for May Day events, the Sturmabteilung, SA, occupied trade union offices across Germany. All trade unions were dissolved, their leaders were arrested, and some were sent to concentration camps. In their place, the German Labor Front, Deutsche Arbeitsfront, DAF, was created as a state-controlled organization representing workers, employers, and officials in line with the Nazi concept of Volksgemeinschaft, people's community. By the end of June 1933, remaining political parties had been pressured or intimidated into disbanding, including the German National People's Party, DNVP, the Nazis' previous coalition partner. On the 14th of July, 1933, the Nazi Party was officially declared the only legal political party in Germany. Meanwhile, the SA, led by Ernst Röhm, demanded more political and military influence, causing concern among the German army, industrial leaders, and conservative politicians. To secure the support of the military and prevent internal conflict, Hitler ordered a purge of the SA leadership and other political opponents in an event known as the Night of the Long Knives, which took place from 30 June to 2 July 1934. Röhm, other senior SA members, and several political figures, including Gregor Strasser and former Chancellor Kurt von Schleicher, were arrested and executed. Although some Germans and foreign observers were shocked, many in Germany believed Hitler had acted to restore order. President Paul von Hindenburg died on the 2nd of August, 1934. One day earlier, the cabinet had passed the law concerning the head of state of the German Reich, which abolished the office of president upon Hindenburg's death and transferred its powers to the chancellor. Hitler therefore became both head of state and head of government, adopting the title Führer und Reichskanzler, leader and chancellor of the Reich. This removed the last constitutional mechanism by which he could be dismissed. As head of state, Hitler became commander-in-chief of the German armed forces. At the request of military leaders, the traditional oath of loyalty taken by soldiers was changed. Instead of swearing allegiance to Germany or the Constitution, soldiers now swore unconditional loyalty personally to Adolf Hitler. On the 19th of August, 1934, a national plebiscite approved the merger of president and chancellor into a single office, with 88% of voters in favor. In early 1938, Hitler further consolidated his authority over the military during the Blomberg-Fritsch affair. War Minister Werner von Blomberg was forced to resign after police records revealed that his new wife had a criminal background. Shortly after, Army Commander Colonel General Werner von Fritsch was dismissed following accusations of homosexuality presented by the SS. Both men had opposed Hitler's requests to prepare the army for war in 1938. Hitler then assumed the position of commander-in-chief himself and replaced the Ministry of War with the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, led by General Wilhelm Keitel. On the same day, 16 generals were removed from their positions and 44 others were transferred. By early February 1938, 12 additional generals had been dismissed. Throughout his rule, Hitler maintained the appearance of legality. Many of his decrees were issued under the authority of the Reichstag Fire Decree and Article 48 of the Weimar Constitution. The Reichstag renewed the Enabling Act twice, each time for 4 years. Parliamentary elections still took place in 1933, 1936, and 1938, but voters were presented with only one list of Nazi and pro-Nazi candidates. These elections returned results of above 90% in favor of the regime. Voting was neither free nor secret, and citizens who refused to vote or voted against the list risked punishment. In August 1934, Adolf Hitler appointed Hjalmar Schacht, president of the Reichsbank, as Minister of Economics. The following year, Schacht was also named plenipotentiary for war economy, responsible for preparing Germany's economy for war. Economic recovery and rearmament were financed through Mefo bills, a form of credit, printing money, and confiscating property from individuals and groups classified as enemies of the state, including Jews. Unemployment, which had been around 6 million people in 1932, declined to fewer than 1 million by 1936. Hitler directed one of the largest infrastructure development programs in German history, building roads, including the Autobahn network, railways, dams, and other public works. However, wages in the mid to late 1930s were slightly lower than during the Weimar Republic, and the cost of living increased by about 25%. By 1939, the average German work week had risen to between 47 and 50 hours in support of the war economy. Hitler's government also promoted large-scale architecture. Albert Speer, an architect close to Hitler, was given responsibility for redesigning parts of Berlin into a monumental capital. Despite protests and threats of international boycotts, Germany hosted both the 1936 Winter Olympics in Garmisch-Partenkirchen and the Summer Olympics in Berlin. Hitler attended the opening ceremonies and several events. As early as February 1933, in a meeting with military leaders, Hitler stated that his long-term foreign policy goal was the conquest of Lebensraum, living space, in Eastern Europe and its Germanization. Official foreign policy statements from the German government included goals such as union with Austria, restoring Germany's borders from before World War I, rejecting the Treaty of Versailles, reclaiming former colonies, and expanding German influence in Eastern Europe. Hitler considered these plans too limited and instead emphasized peaceful intentions in his public speeches. In October 1933, Germany withdrew from the League of Nations and the World Disarmament Conference. On the 13th of January 1935, a plebiscite was held in the Saarland. Over 90% of voters chose to reunite with Germany. In March 1935, Hitler announced that Germany would reintroduce conscription and expand the military to 600,000 members. He also began developing the Air Force, Luftwaffe, and strengthening the Navy. These actions openly violated the Treaty of Versailles. Britain, France, Italy, and the League of Nations condemned the actions but took no military action. Instead, Britain signed the Anglo-German Naval Agreement on the 18th of June 1935, allowing Germany to build a navy up to 35% of the Royal Navy's size. Hitler saw this as the beginning of a potential partnership with Britain. In March 1936, Hitler ordered German troops to reoccupy the demilitarized Rhineland, in violation of the Treaty of Versailles and the Locarno treaties. No military response followed from France or Britain. In July 1936, after a request from Spanish General Francisco Franco, Hitler sent troops and equipment to support the nationalist side during the Spanish Civil War. Germany's rapid rearmament began to strain its economy. In August 1936, Hitler ordered Hermann Göring to implement the 4-year plan, aimed at preparing Germany for war within 4 years. The plan emphasized increased armament, economic self-sufficiency, autarky, and preparing for an eventual conflict between German Nazism and Judeo-Bolshevism. In October 1936, Italian Foreign Minister Galeazzo Ciano visited Germany. On the 1st of November 1936, Benito Mussolini declared an axis between Rome and Berlin. On 25th November 1936, Germany signed the Anti-Comintern Pact with Japan, aimed against the Communist International led by the Soviet Union. Italy joined the pact in 1937. Hitler abandoned hopes of an Anglo-German alliance, blaming weak British leadership. In November 1937, during a meeting recorded in the Hossbach Memorandum, Hitler outlined plans for territorial expansion in Austria and Czechoslovakia to secure Lebensraum. He argued that economic pressures and declining living standards in Germany could only be resolved through military expansion. He urged swift action before Britain and France strengthened their military capabilities. In early 1938, after the Blomberg-Fritsch affair, Hitler removed several military leaders who opposed his aggressive foreign policy. He assumed direct command of the armed forces as commander-in-chief and replaced the Ministry of War with the Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, OKW, led by Wilhelm Keitel. He dismissed Foreign Minister Konstantin von Neurath and began personally directing foreign policy. By this point, Hitler's foreign policy was firmly oriented toward war. In February 1938, Adolf Hitler shifted German foreign policy in East Asia. Acting on the advice of his new foreign minister, Joachim von Ribbentrop, who strongly favored closer ties with Japan, Hitler ended the long-standing Sino-German cooperation with the Republic of China. Germany officially recognized Manchukuo, Japan's puppet state in Manchuria, and renounced claims to its former Pacific colonies now held by Japan. Hitler ordered an immediate halt to arms shipments to China and recalled German military advisors from the Chinese Nationalist Army. In response, Chinese leader Chiang Kai-shek canceled all economic agreements with Germany, cutting off access to valuable Chinese raw materials. On the 12th of March 1938, German troops entered Austria. Hitler announced the union, Anschluss, of Austria with Germany. The annexation was presented as a reunification of all German-speaking people under one nation. There was no military resistance. After Austria, Hitler focused on the Sudetenland region of Czechoslovakia, which had a large ethnic German population. On 28th to 29th March 1938, he met privately in Berlin with Konrad Henlein, leader of the Sudeten German Party. They agreed Henlein would demand greater autonomy for Sudeten Germans, creating a diplomatic crisis that could justify German intervention. Henlein later stated that, regardless of concessions from Czechoslovakia, he would always increase demands to prevent any agreement. Although the Sudeten issue was presented publicly as a matter of self-determination, Hitler was primarily interested in weakening and eventually conquering Czechoslovakia. In April 1938, he ordered the German High Command, OKW, to prepare military plans for invading Czechoslovakia, known as Fall Grün, Case Green. In response to international pressure from France and Britain, Czechoslovak President Edvard Beneš introduced the so-called Fourth Plan on September 5, 1938, granting most of Henlein's autonomy demands. Henlein's party responded by organizing violent demonstrations and provoking clashes with Czechoslovak police. Martial law was declared in parts of the Sudetenland. Germany depended heavily on imported oil. Hitler was concerned that a conflict with Britain and France over Czechoslovakia might disrupt Germany's access to oil. As a result, he temporarily postponed military plans. On September 29, 1938, Hitler met with British Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain, French Prime Minister Édouard Daladier, and Italian leader Benito Mussolini in Munich. The resulting Munich Agreement allowed Germany to annex the Sudetenland without war. British Prime Minister Chamberlain described the agreement as achieving peace for our time. Hitler, however, privately considered the outcome disappointing because it prevented war in 1938. On the 9th of October 1938, he said at a speech in Saarbrücken that Germany had been denied an opportunity for decisive military action. Nonetheless, he gained international recognition, and later that year, Time magazine named him Man of the Year. By late 1938, Germany was experiencing economic strain caused by rapid rearmament. Hitler called for export or die, encouraging increased exports to accumulate foreign currency for raw material imports. On 14th March 1939, under pressure from Hungary, Slovakia declared independence and placed itself under German protection. The next day, Hitler ordered German forces into the remaining territory of Czechoslovakia. From Prague Castle, he declared the establishment of the Protectorate of Bohemia and Moravia. This violated the Munich Agreement and marked the first German expansion that was not justified by ethnic German claims. By early 1939, Adolf Hitler increasingly viewed Britain as Germany's principal enemy. In private discussions, he stated that Poland would need to be removed as a state in order to secure Germany's eastern flank before a confrontation with Britain. When Britain issued a guarantee of Polish independence on 31st March 1939, Hitler interpreted it as an attempt to encircle Germany. He responded by threatening to renounce the Anglo-German naval agreement and began planning for war. Initially, Hitler preferred turning Poland into a German satellite state. The Polish government rejected this idea, prompting Hitler to order preparations for an invasion. On the 3rd of April 1939, he instructed the military to prepare for Fall Weiss, Case White, a planned invasion of Poland to begin on the 25th of August. On the 28th of April, he formally renounced both the Anglo-German Naval Agreement and the German-Polish Non-Aggression Pact. Historians such as William Carr, Gerhard Weinberg, and Ian Kershaw have suggested that Hitler's urgency for war was partly due to his belief that he might not live long and therefore needed to act while he still had full authority. Despite concerns that invading Poland could lead to war with Britain and France, German Foreign Minister Joachim von Ribbentrop assured Hitler that neither country would intervene. To avoid a two-front war, Hitler sought cooperation from the Soviet Union. On 23 August 1939, Germany and the Soviet Union signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty that included a secret protocol dividing Poland and Eastern Europe into German and Soviet spheres of influence. However, the signing of the Anglo-Polish alliance on the 25th of August and Italy's refusal to support a war caused Hitler to delay the invasion to the 1st of September 1939. On the 1st of September 1939, Germany invaded Western Poland, claiming it was responding to Polish provocations over the free city of Danzig and the Polish corridor. On the 3rd of September, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Hitler, reportedly surprised, asked Ribbentrop, "What now?" Although war was declared, Britain and France took no immediate large-scale military action. On the 17th of September, the Soviet Union invaded eastern Poland in accordance with the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact. By early October, Poland had been defeated and partitioned. Following the conquest, Germany established administrative regions in Polish territory. Hitler instructed the newly appointed Gauleiters, Albert Forster in Danzig, West Prussia, and Arthur Greiser in Wartheland, to Germanize their areas. Forster allowed local Poles to register as ethnic Germans, while Greiser, aligned with Heinrich Himmler, began a program of forced expulsions and ethnic cleansing. Hitler did not intervene, which has been cited as an example of the concept of working toward the Führer, where subordinates interpreted and acted on Hitler's general intentions. A dispute emerged between Himmler and Greiser, who supported ethnic cleansing, and Hermann Göring and Hans Frank, who proposed using Poland as an agricultural base, granary of the Reich. In February 1940, Hitler initially sided with Göring and Frank, ending mass expulsions due to their economic impact. However, on the 15th of May 1940, Himmler issued a memorandum proposing the deportation of all European Jews to Africa and reducing Poles to a subordinate labor population. Hitler described Himmler's ideas as good and correct and reintroduced harsher policies in occupied Poland. On the 9th of April 1940, Germany invaded Denmark and Norway. Hitler declared the establishment of the Greater Germanic Reich, a future union of Germanic nations under German leadership. In May 1940, Germany began invasions of France, Belgium, the Netherlands, and Luxembourg. Italy joined the war on Germany's side on the 10th of June. France signed an armistice with Germany on the 22nd of June. Hitler's popularity within Germany peaked following these rapid victories, when he returned to Berlin from Paris in July 1940. Large crowds greeted him. 12 generals were promoted to field marshal during a ceremony that celebrated these successes. Britain, though forced to withdraw from France at Dunkirk, continued to fight. Hitler offered peace to the new British Prime Minister, Winston Churchill, who refused. Soon after, the Luftwaffe began air attacks on British airfields, radar stations, and later cities, including London. These raids marked the beginning of the Battle of Britain. By late September, it became clear Germany had not achieved air superiority. Hitler postponed the planned invasion of Britain, known as Operation Sea Lion. German bombing of British cities continued in what became known as the Blitz. On September 27, 1940, Germany, Italy, and Japan signed the Tripartite Pact in Berlin, forming the Axis powers. Hungary, Romania, and Bulgaria joined shortly afterward. Hitler attempted to persuade the Soviet Union to join this anti-British alliance, but talks in November 1940 between Soviet Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov and Hitler ended without agreement. Soon after, Hitler ordered preparations for an invasion of the Soviet Union. In early 1941, German forces were deployed in multiple regions, including North Africa, the Balkans, and the Middle East. In February, German troops arrived in Libya to support Italian forces. In April, Germany invaded Yugoslavia and Greece. In May, German forces also supported an uprising in Iraq and captured the island of Crete. On 22 June 1941, Adolf Hitler launched Operation Barbarossa, a large-scale invasion of the Soviet Union, violating the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939. More than 3 million Axis soldiers advanced across a broad front. The objectives of the campaign were the destruction of the Soviet Union, the acquisition of its natural resources, and the expansion of German Lebensraum in the East. Hitler also believed that defeating the Soviet Union would compel Britain to negotiate peace. German forces made rapid progress. By early August, they had occupied the Baltic states, Belarus, and parts of Ukraine, advancing more than 500 kilometers. After the Battle of Smolensk, Hitler ordered Army Group Center to pause its advance on Moscow and redirect armored divisions toward Leningrad and Kiev. Many senior officers disagreed with this decision, arguing it weakened the primary offensive. The delay allowed the Soviet Union to mobilize additional reserves. The renewed German offensive toward Moscow in October failed, and Soviet counterattacks in December pushed German forces back from the capital. During this time, Hitler appointed himself commander-in-chief of the German army. On the 7th of December 1941, Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. 4 days later, on the 11th of December, Hitler declared war on the United States. On the 18th of December 1941, Heinrich Himmler asked Hitler what should be done with Jews in Soviet territories. Hitler replied, "Exterminate them as partisans." Historians such as Yehuda Bauer consider this one of the closest statements to a direct order from Hitler for the genocide of European Jews, later known as the Holocaust. In late 1942, Axis forces were defeated at the Second Battle of El Alamein, ending German hopes of seizing the Suez Canal and advancing into the Middle East. Increasingly distrustful of his generals, Hitler intervened more directly in military planning. From late 1942 to early 1943, the Battle of Stalingrad resulted in the near-total destruction of the German Sixth Army after Hitler refused to permit a withdrawal. Over 200,000 Axis soldiers were killed, and approximately 235,000 were taken prisoner. Shortly afterward, German forces suffered another major defeat at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943. These losses marked the turning point of the war in the East. Hitler's decisions became increasingly erratic, and both his health and Germany's economic and military position deteriorated. In July 1943, following the Allied invasion of Sicily, Italian dictator Benito Mussolini was removed from power by King Victor Emmanuel III. Italy surrendered to the Allies shortly afterward. Throughout 1943 and 1944, the Soviet Union steadily pushed German forces westward. On the 6th of June 1944, Allied forces landed in Normandy, France, in Operation Overlord. This opened a second front in Western Europe. Many German military officers began to believe the war was unwinnable and that Hitler's leadership threatened the survival of Germany. Between 1939 and 1945, several attempts were made to assassinate Hitler. The most significant was the 20th of July, plot of 1944, part of Operation Valkyrie. On that day, Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg placed a bomb inside Hitler's headquarters at the Wolf's Lair in East Prussia. Hitler survived the explosion because the bomb was moved behind a solid table leg by Officer Heinz Brandt, which shielded him from the full blast. After the failed assassination, Hitler ordered mass arrests and executions. More than 4,900 people were killed in the aftermath. By December 1944, Hitler was placed on the United Nations War Crimes Commission's first list of war criminals. By March 1945, at least 7 formal indictments had been issued against him. By late 1944, Allied forces were advancing from both east and west. The Red Army progressed through Eastern Europe, while American, British, and other Western Allied forces moved through France and the Low Countries toward Germany. Hitler considered the Soviet Union the greater danger, but believed the Western Allies were militarily and morally weaker. On the 16th of December 1944, he launched the Ardennes Offensive, Battle of the Bulge, hoping to divide the Western Allies and force a separate peace. The operation made some initial gains, but ultimately failed. By early 1945, German infrastructure lay in ruins. In a radio address in January, Hitler insisted that Germany would endure despite its current crisis. On the 19th of March 1945, he issued the Nero Decree, ordering the destruction of all German industrial facilities to prevent their capture by the Allies. Albert Speer, Minister of Armaments, received responsibility for executing this policy, but deliberately did not carry it out. Hitler hoped that the death of U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt on the 12th of April 1945 would create divisions among the Allies. No such division occurred. On the 20th of April 1945, his 56th birthday, Hitler briefly left the Führer bunker beneath the Reich Chancellery in Berlin to award Iron Crosses to members of the Hitler Youth defending the city. Soviet forces, under General Georgy Zhukov, had broken through German lines and reached the outskirts of Berlin by the 21st of April. Hitler remained in the bunker and ordered a counterattack by Army Detachment Steiner, although the unit lacked the strength to carry out the operation. On the 22nd of April, during a military conference, Hitler was informed that Steiner's attack had not begun and that Soviet forces had entered Berlin. In anger, he declared that everything is lost for the first time. He announced his intention to remain in Berlin and commit suicide rather than surrender. By 23rd April, Berlin was encircled by Soviet forces. On the same day, Hermann Göring, stationed in Bavaria, sent Hitler a telegram suggesting he should assume leadership if Hitler was incapacitated. Hitler reacted by ordering Göring's arrest and removing him from all positions of authority. On the 28th of April, Hitler learned that Heinrich Himmler had secretly attempted to negotiate a surrender to the Western Allies. Hitler considered this treason and ordered Himmler's arrest. He also ordered the execution of Hermann Fegelein, Himmler's representative in Berlin. After midnight on the 28th to the 29th of April, Hitler married his longtime companion Eva Braun in a civil ceremony inside the bunker. Later that day, he received confirmation that Benito Mussolini had been killed by Italian partisans. This news reinforced his resolve to avoid capture. On the 30th of April 1945, as Soviet troops were within a few hundred meters of the Reich Chancellery, Adolf Hitler killed himself by shooting himself in the head, while Eva Braun died by ingesting cyanide. Following Hitler's instructions, their bodies were carried to the garden behind the Reich Chancellery, doused in petrol, and set on fire. In his political testament written shortly before his death, Hitler appointed Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz as president, Reichspräsident, and Joseph Goebbels as chancellor, Reichskanzler. Goebbels and his wife, Magda, poisoned their 6 children with cyanide on the 1st of May and then committed suicide. Berlin surrendered to Soviet forces on the 2nd of May, 1945. The remains of Goebbels, Hitler's dog Blondie, and other figures were recovered and reburied multiple times by Soviet authorities. Hitler's and Braun's bodies were reported to have been moved or destroyed. No confirmed remains were publicly produced, apart from dental fragments used for identification. News of Hitler's death spread rapidly. A formal death certificate was not issued until 1956, after testimony from 42 witnesses was examined. His death was legally registered as an assumed death. Adolf Hitler's war in Eastern Europe and the Holocaust were rooted in his long-standing belief that Jews were the primary enemy of the German people, and that Germany required additional living space, Lebensraum, in Eastern Europe. Hitler aimed to defeat Poland and the Soviet Union, remove existing populations, and replace them with German settlers. He regarded Jews, Slavs, and other groups as obstacles to this goal. The Nazi regime developed the General Plan Ost, General Plan for the East, which outlined the forced deportation of millions from Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union to Siberia, where they would be used as slave labor or killed. These territories were intended to be resettled by ethnic Germans, or those considered suitable for Germanization. When the invasion of the Soviet Union failed to achieve total victory, Hitler accelerated these plans. By January 1942, he had decided that Jews, Slavs, and others deemed undesirable should be systematically eliminated. The mass murder of Jews and other targeted groups was primarily organized by Heinrich Himmler and Reinhard Heydrich. On the 20th of January 1942, senior Nazi officials held the Wannsee Conference, led by Heydrich, where they discussed and coordinated the implementation of the final solution, the planned extermination of European Jews. Records from this meeting serve as clear evidence of administrative planning for genocide. Hitler made various remarks indicating approval of mass killings. On February 22, 1942, he stated that Germany would only heal by eliminating Jews. In July 1941, he suggested that order in occupied Eastern territories could be achieved by shooting anyone considered suspicious. No written direct order from Hitler has been found explicitly authorizing the Holocaust. However, speeches, recorded statements, and diaries of Nazi officials indicate that he endorsed and encouraged the extermination policies. He regularly repeated his 1939 statement that a world war would result in the annihilation of the Jewish people. Hitler approved the creation of Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units that followed the German army into Poland, the Baltic states, and the Soviet Union. These units carried out mass shootings of Jews, communists, and others. By mid-1942, the Auschwitz concentration camp was expanded to carry out extermination on a large scale. Numerous other camps, including extermination camps such as Treblinka, Sobibor, and Belzec, were established across occupied Europe. Between 1939 and 1945, the SS, with the help of collaborationist governments and local recruits, was responsible for the deaths of at least 11 million non-combatants. These included approximately 6 million Jews, representing about 2/3 of Europe's Jewish population, and between 200,000 and 1,500,000 Romani people. Millions of others, including Soviet prisoners of war, political opponents, homosexuals, people with disabilities, Jehovah's Witnesses, trade unionists, and others, were also killed. Victims were murdered in gas chambers, mass shootings, ghettos, starvation, disease, harsh labor, and medical experiments. The Nazis also planned to reduce the population of Eastern Europe by deliberate starvation through the hunger plan. Food supplies would be diverted to the German army and civilians, while local populations would be left to starve. Combined with General Plan Ost, these policies were projected to result in the deaths of up to 80 million people in the Soviet Union. Even partial implementation of these plans led to millions of additional deaths, bringing total civilian and prisoner of war deaths in the East to an estimated 19.3 million. Hitler promoted the idea of racial hygiene. On the 15th of September 1935, he introduced the Nuremberg Laws, which banned marriages and sexual relations between Jews and Aryans. These laws were later extended to include Romani people, black people, and people of mixed ancestry. The laws also stripped Jews and other non-Aryans of German citizenship and prohibited Jewish households from employing non-Jewish women under 45. Earlier persecution included forced sterilization programs and the killing of children with disabilities. From 1939, Hitler authorized Action T4, a euthanasia program in which adults with severe physical or mental disabilities were killed. Estimates suggest that around 70,000 people were murdered under this program before public criticism led to its official end, though the killings continued in secret afterward. Adolf Hitler deliberately cultivated a public image of a man who was unmarried, celibate, and wholly devoted to Germany and his political mission. This persona was used to present him as self-sacrificing and above personal interests. His domestic life was concealed from the public and from most within the Nazi Party. In reality, Hitler began a private relationship with Eva Braun in 1929. Braun was a young assistant at the photography studio of Heinrich Hoffmann, Hitler's official photographer. Their relationship remained hidden from the public throughout his political career. On 29 April 1945, in the Führer bunker in Berlin, Hitler and Eva Braun were married in a brief civil ceremony. Less than 40 hours later, on the 30th of April 1945, they both died by suicide. In September 1931, Hitler's half-niece Gaily Raubal died by suicide in his Munich apartment using his pistol. She was the daughter of his half-sister, Angela Raubal. Gaily had lived in Hitler's household for some time, and there were widespread rumors among contemporaries about a possible romantic attachment between them. Her death reportedly caused Hitler significant emotional distress and remained a painful memory for the rest of his life. The last surviving member of Hitler's immediate family was his younger sister, Paula Hitler, who lived a largely private life and avoided public attention. She died in June 1960. According to the historian Joachim Fest, Adolf Hitler's death was described by many contemporaries as the breaking of a spell. Albert Speer, in Inside the Third Reich, wrote that only after Hitler's suicide did the illusion surrounding his authority finally disappear. By April 1945, public support for Hitler had almost entirely vanished. Most Germans were preoccupied with survival, fleeing advancing armies, or coping with the collapse of the country. As historian Ian Kershaw notes, there was little public mourning. The majority were indifferent or relieved. Historian John Toland similarly stated that Nazism burst like a bubble once Hitler was gone. Kershaw described Hitler as the embodiment of modern political evil, adding that never in history has such ruination, physical and moral, been associated with the name of one man. Hitler's actions plunged the world into a global conflict, leaving behind widespread destruction across Eastern and Central Europe. In Germany, the aftermath was described as Stunde Null, 0 hour, a moment of total collapse and a forced new beginning. The consequences of Hitler's rule were catastrophic. The the Nazi regime was responsible for the deaths of an estimated 19.3 million civilians and prisoners of war through mass murder, executions, forced labor, starvation, and genocide. Additionally, around 28.7 million soldiers and civilians died in military operations in Europe during the Second World War. Civilian deaths reached levels that had never before been seen in warfare. As a result, Nazism and Holocaust denial are illegal in many European countries. Historian Friedrich Meinecke described Hitler as an extreme example of how individual personality can alter the course of history. Hugh Trevor Roper characterized Hitler as one of history's terrible simplifiers, systematic and ideological, yet brutally ruthless and lacking mercy. John M. Roberts believed Hitler's defeat marked the end of Germany's dominance in European affairs, giving rise instead to the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union. Sebastian Haffner argued that, without Hitler and the persecution of the Jews, the creation of the modern state of Israel might not have occurred. He also claimed that decolonization in Asia and Africa would have been delayed. Hafner further suggested that, aside from Alexander the Great, few individuals, if any, changed the world as profoundly and as quickly as Hitler. Adolf Hitler left behind a legacy of ruin. His rise was built on propaganda, fear, and blind loyalty. His fall was marked by destruction, suicide, and the collapse of the ideology he created. After his death, Germany lay in ruins, millions were dead, and the world was forced to confront the horrors committed in his name. Nazism did not survive without its leader. The spell was broken. Yet the consequences of his actions, war, genocide, displaced populations, new borders, the Cold War, and the founding of Israel, continued to shape the modern world for decades to come. This is the end of the story, one of overwhelming power, catastrophic decisions, and a legacy that remains a warning. How much destruction a single individual, unopposed, can bring upon the world.